Good morning. Welcome into the virtual conference. I'm Dr. Jay Cofield. Glad to be here. I'm with the University of Montevallo. I teach TV production and I use OBS Studio a lot. That's what we're going to be going over today. So I'm very glad to be here. If you guys have any questions, please email me at cofieldj@montevallo.edu. It's the address you see on the screen right there. And what I'm going to be doing today is kind of spending some time going through 7 different things that hopefully will help you use OBS Studio and use it well. We're going to first off take a look at the interface, kind of an overview of what's going on. Then we'll go through some settings you'll need to know, how to set up a scene because that's very important, using the audio mixer, some of the different controls you'll need, how to use studio mode, which is a little bit more powerful, and then some important things to know that'll really help you get the most out of it. So OBS Studio is a free program, and that might, a lot of times you hear free and you get what you pay for, but in the case of OBS Studio, it's been around a while and has gone through a number of versions, and it's really powerful. It's also gotten a lot more stable. There are a couple of things you do need to know, namely you do need a pretty good computer to work with it. Not the world's most fastest, not a super honking, just super strong computer. For example, this computer I've got behind me is just, a basic desktop computer. Not a lot of memory, I think maybe 8 gig, just kind of, a decent computer. But it's running OBS Studio and it'll stream with no problem. My laptop I've got here, a little more powerful, it's got a nice graphics chip in it, and it works great. So as long as you have, not the lowest end computer, and even those will work, sort of, but as long as you've got a pretty decent computer, you can stream pretty well with it. So let's go ahead and talk about the OBS interface in general. So what you see here on the screen, this is what you'll see when you open it up. A couple of things you need to know about this is called the basic mode. You'll see up here the output. This is what you will stream out. Scenes over here are where you set up different cameras, different microphones, and that's kind of really how OBS Studio works, are using scenes. I'll talk more about that in a second. Sources, this is where you actually set up like webcams and things. The audio mixer is very, very important. I'm going to be spending some more time specifically about that. And then over here, this is of course where all your controls to start streaming and start recording are. You'll see the start streaming. When you push this, it actually starts streaming, rather right there. And when you start recording, it will actually start recording. Under settings, this is where you go in and you set up where it streams to, where it records to. How does it stream? How does it record? Things like that. Something real important that you do need to keep an eye on, and this kind of relates back to the strength of your computer and making sure everything is going good. This down here, this little area here where you see it says CPU, 30 FPS right here, record and live, this is your basic stats. This is where you can see the health of your stream that you're sending out. You always want to make sure that your CPU is not overloaded. You also want to make sure that you're pushing out the frame per second, which uses about 30 frames per second from your webcam source. Generally, OBS Studio will warn you if it thinks it's getting too overloaded, and you'll also see frames drop or frames skip. So as long as you're kind of keeping an eye on this, and as long as, like you can see right now, mine's at 13–14%, you're in good shape. This computer over here behind me is running at 4% just for that video. So I've got Chrome open and a couple other things that's adding into my load. So the biggest thing is just making sure that your computer is not overloading itself. So I did also want to kind of spend a little more time talking in this section about scenes versus sources. So scenes are where, again, as you can kind of see, you can set up basic looks. So this is my basic default scene that you start, and you'll see it says you don't have any sources, and it asks you to add them. So I went ahead and created a couple ahead of time. I've got a USB webcam source, which is this little guy that's sitting right here on my computer. Then I've also got my internal webcam, and I'll talk about why this isn't full screen in just a couple of minutes in the setup section. This is my internal laptop webcamera. I have a Blackmagic device called an ATEM Mini Pro. Blackmagic makes a lot of video converters that convert any, like a camera, any video camera or studio system or whatever like that. It'll convert it into something, a USB source that your computer can see and that OBS can see as well. Very powerful. This computer behind me is using an older Blackmagic web presenter, and the ATEM Mini Pro is also, and the ATEM Mini are also very, very good choices for that because they work pretty well. and they're fairly inexpensive. So this isn't a plug for the Blackmagic devices, but they're very popular, and they work really well. They do what they say they're going to do, all for under $600 a piece. And I've also got an NDI source set up. NDI stands for Network Device Interface. It's a new tech product, software plugin that allows you to take various video sources or anything like that and run them across the network. So this is actually the output from one of my studio system devices here at Montevallo and Strong Hall. So those are scenes. Again, you can see I've got different scenes set up. Inside the scenes, you have to set up sources because scenes are just collections of sources, what you see in here. And you can have sources that are images, that are slideshows, that are media, files playing back video clips, whatever you need to have. You can even have browser windows, and I'll go over those more in a minute. But that's what you see in here in the output. You also have to set up audio sources as well. Sources live inside scenes. And it gets a little confusing. This is where you have to watch, especially if you're going from scene to scene, going from an internal web camera to maybe an external device like the Blackmagic thing or something like that. You do have to make sure that the audio source follows with it. If you duplicate a scene, you want to make sure that audio, as you'll see here right now, I've got on my USB webcam the audio input right there, and if I go to the ATEM, it's gone away. So it's just kind of a little hassle thing that you have to be aware of, to get the most out of it. So again, you want to make sure that when you have audio sources that they appear in each scene. And I'll explain this in just a second as we start going through how to set up scenes in just a couple of minutes in the next segment. So in fact, now's a great time for us to move on to a segment about settings. All right, so in this section, I want to go through what the settings you'll need to know and kind of change and how to work those in OBS Studio. So let me go ahead and click on the settings tab right here. And when it brings it up, you'll see you've got, general and a few other things. And generally, in the general tab, I really haven't had to make any changes. I guess you can play some, but you just really don't need to. So let's move on to the stream one. Stream is where you really do most of your stuff. Stream is where you tell OBS where to send to. Are you going to send to YouTube or Facebook, both, either, whatever like that. With this, I just recently reinstalled OBS as kind of starts from scratch for this project with a new profile. It starts off with Twitch. Twitch is gaming, but I just generally, that's if you want to game stream there, you can. So most of the stuff we're going to use and talk about today is Facebook and YouTube. Those are really the two most popular for live streaming. You see I can click on this and it brings up some things you'll need to see. These are generally the default ones, Facebook, YouTube Live, Facebook Live. And it's real important to note that by default, OBS Studio can only stream to one place at a time. Generally, it's either Facebook or YouTube. Restream that I've got pulled up right here is a paid service that is kind of a paid stream duplicator. It allows you to send one stream to Restream, and then it will kind of duplicate it to wherever you want it to go, depending on how much you pay for it. There is a brand new plugin, and OBS Studio has a number of different plugins that are pretty cool, which are kind of add-ons, free add-ons. There is a new plugin that allows you to stream to two places at one time, but it's really new, and I haven't really had a chance to test it, so I've mentioned it. If you want to Google it and try it, if you're feeling pretty advanced and whatnot, then go for it. But I don't feel comfortable recommending it just yet because I literally have not tested it that much yet. And you also have to make sure that your computer and network will support the processing that it will take to send two streams from one computer. So if you send it to me, I can send you the link for that. So let's go and take a look at some options you'll need and how to change them for the different kind of more default, sending it to one place at a time. So I'm just going to start on YouTube Gaming. Generally in OBS, when you pick the service, it brings up the server. And nowadays, you don't have to really type anything in like that. OBS has gotten advanced enough that when I tell it, YouTube or Facebook Live, it already knows where to go by default, which is really nice. I don't have to pick any of that stuff. It's just there's one place, they've got it kind of down to a science. So generally it's the primary one. Stream key, this is important. Stream key is what tells YouTube or Facebook or whatever like that this is your stream. So it kind of matches it up. So with the stream key, I'm telling it this is Dr. Cofield's stream, and Facebook realizes when I'm on that page that, okay, this goes to Dr. Cofield's page or on YouTube to my YouTube channel. So that just identifies it to the service, from where it's coming from. So let me kind of go over that real quick. And it's real easy to find, real easy to set up. So I'm going to go do these one at a time. We'll go to YouTube first. Open up my Chrome browser. So you can see I've got my live streaming opened up in YouTube. And to get there, it's pretty easy. I'm just going to, yes, it is that time to go vote as I record this, as we'll see. So in YouTube, I just kind of come up here and tell it to go live. It brings up the YouTube Studio that we already have been looking at. And then down here in the window, you'll see that I've got a couple of places that says default stream key variable. Over here, this is kind of my preview. Right now I've got it unlisted because this is a test and I just, it's a test. So this is where you get your stream key from. Generally, all you got to do is push copy. You can do some things. I can click on it, it'll show me the stream key. If you want to check it, you can see mine ends up in the EHF7 right there. So generally all you have to do is push copy. So I'm going to copy it, and you see it says successfully copied to clipboard. So I come back into OBS Studio, and I simply right click and I can just paste. And now it's ready to go. And then I can apply that and it'll save it. And the same thing if I come up here to Facebook Live. Okay, so here we are with our stream key. I hit apply and then I hit OK. And now I'm ready, and I'll kind of go over this more in detail later. But basically I'm just going to go ahead and do the start streaming. And you'll see my basic stats kind of pops up down here. Real important, it's green, life is good, 30 frames per second, all that kind of good stuff. So I'm going to pop back over here into Chrome, and you'll see now I'm starting to pick up my stream, and it shows me what OBS is getting. So I'm not going to go live with this or anything, because this is of course a recording for a virtual conference, but just did want you to see that that's kind of how that happens. So back into OBS Studio, and now I'm going to stop streaming so I can demonstrate Facebook Live. So again, we've stopped, so let me go back into settings. So I click on Facebook Live, and I need to put in my stream key. So I'm going to go over to Firefox, where I've got it set up this time, and we're using our It's Music, or I'm using my It's Music page for our student music show. If you get a chance to check it out, shameless plug. So It's Music, I'm going to come here and I'm going to tell it create live. And that brings up the Facebook producer. Eventually. Sure, yes, welcome to Live Producer. And one thing in Facebook Live, generally you want to use a stream key because we're using OBS Studio, so you always want to use a stream key. The camera is the built-in web camera. Parrot encoder, that's way beyond the purpose of this course. So we're just going to use stream key. Next. Okay, yes, thank you for all the default stuff. So now I need to pull down here, and I need to, you can see my stream key, so I'm going to copy the stream key, and again it's going to go. Now there are a couple of things that you do want to pay attention to in this. You do want to use a persistent stream key, because what happens is, that we're used every time with that. Now another thing that you want to do that's real important, I think, for Facebook Live is this setting that says in live video if the stream stops. This is, I turn this on because if something happens, network blinks or whatever, something, because things happen on the internet, and I have to restart the stream, I don't want to have to restart the whole event on Facebook Live. So you can see it's waiting for live video, so I'm going to go back to OBS Studio, right click and do paste again. You can see my longer stream key. Do apply. Okay, and now I'm going to start streaming. We'll switch over here just to kind of show you guys the difference. Come back there and you can see there's my color bars that I'm streaming out in the little preview window. So again, that's the basics of streaming, the settings. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of the stream tab. But now let's move on down to the output tab. In the output mode, you've got two versions, simple and advanced. Generally, for everything you'll do, the simple is fine. Simple works most of the time. Now, you do want to make sure that you've got your proper settings set up in here, proper output settings, because what you don't want to have happen is you don't want to overload your computer or drop frames, and drop frames is where things stutter and skip and all that. And again, I've got, our little bit slower computer back here is still doing pretty good. This computer's doing fine. The computer that I'm recording it on right now, my screen recorder, is telling me that it's running at 27 frames per second. So I'm actually missing a little bit here and there. But generally, if your computer is, and it's an older iMac that I'm recording on, by the way, generally, if your computer will handle it, you should have absolutely no problem. But I do want to mention a couple of things on here. Video bitrate. This is, excuse me, video bitrate. Video bitrate is how much detail you'll eventually have in your stream. For most of your stuff, like me on screen right here, I don't have a whole lot of motion. So a lower bit rate of 2,000 to 2,500 kilobits is fine. And again, it's just, I don't have, if you have sports or something like that, then you might need to go up in bit rate. You just have to experiment if you're having problems. If your computer and everything looks fine at the default settings, you don't have to change anything. It's again, but if you do need to change it, you will need to. But you can change it up or down. Again, that depends on your network. Generally, like I leave mine at the default and generally have no problem because computers have gotten so much better. The encoder is where the video is processed. You can see I get some choices: software, hardware, or hardware. And again, kind of like with the bitrate setting, you will need to test your system for best results. If you have a very fast graphics card, like a higher-end NVIDIA gaming card, or like I've got a graphics chip on this computer, then you can do it there. Which this is my hardware NVIDIA encoder, right there. That's a hardware one. This computer behind me is running software encoder, and it's doing fine. So OBS is actually pretty good, so you really don't have to worry about that a lot. It's just kind of up to you. You can play with it. Generally, you can leave the audio setting the way it is. Audio is fine. Most of the time, you want to let your recording quality, down here recording, so you have streaming and recording. Most of the time, you want your recording to be pretty much the same as your streaming, because that's a little bit less work that your computer has to do. You're pretty much only compressing it, kind of processing the stream one time. You do need, of course, to pay attention to where it's recording. This is kind of where, like I've got mine set to my videos folder on my C drive, but I can change it over to my D drive, which is my media drive, which you probably should do, so that the OS drive is, there we go, let's do it this one, select. So now it's going to record to the D drive. It should be a little bit less overhead on the computer for that. And you can see, pretty much same as stream, what kind of file size and all that. You don't really have to worry about the replay buffer. So those are the general default settings under the simple thing. And again, most of the time, for most things you'll do, those should suffice. If you do see some errors or some issues with the stream, like if you're doing sports or something, then that's when you kind of want to get into changing it in the simple. But we'll go ahead and run through the advanced tab as well. So under advanced, it pretty much just gives you a little bit more control over what you're doing. You can see now it kind of breaks out these things. I can do audio tracks, which just generally is one. Under streaming, I can set this to the NVIDIA again, which is my graphics card. I don't have to rescale the output. This is kind of interesting right here. You'll see this, CBR or VBR. CBR stands for constant bitrate. Constant bitrate's a little bit lower quality because it pretty much just encodes what it gets with it. If you have a really fast computer, really strong computer, lots of memory, and a really great graphics card, you can do this variable bitrate thing, which variable bitrate, what it does is it kind of tries to see how much motion is in the video and tries to adjust to give you the best quality. So variable bitrate generally gives you more quality in your stream, but it does take a faster computer. And so you can see, it gives me, just a little more options, main bit rate and then the max bit rate. Look ahead, which is kind of interesting, it's like time kind of thing. But we'll just stay with constant bit rate because most of the time that's good. You can see my preset, quality and my profile high because I want to have a good looking stream. Under recording, again, the same, and you can see that the advanced, changed where I set to record to. So I'm just going to go back, put this back to my D drive. And now I can change the recording format to MOV, which are QuickTime files, or MP4, which again is your standard MP4 video H.264 files. And under the stream encoder, I can tell it, if I wanted to change this, have a different one for streaming and recording, now I can do that. Because, I might want to have, depending on my network settings, if I'm someplace, remote, I might want to have a very lower quality stream, and so I can set my stream to, very low quality, but then I can use the separate settings, to record a high quality one for later upload or editing. So that's kind of a neat trick that you can do with OBS Studio, is the streaming and the recording don't have to be the same quality. Depending on if you have a very slow network or congested network, you can do a low quality, like I can come up here in the stream and I can tell it, just use 1,000 kilobit per second stream, which is pretty low quality, and it'll really heavily compress it. And then on the recording, I can set this to 5,000 kilobits per second, which is much higher quality. So that's a really neat trick that you can do with OBS Studio under the Advanced tab. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit apply here. You always do need to hit apply, okay? Just like most other programs. So we'll leave that there under the. And by the way, let me. Generally, you're only going to kind of deal with track 1 of audio. Digital audio files will let you have a number of different tracks, but audio 1 is generally where you're going to go. And most of the time, we don't even have to worry with the replay buffer. So let me move on to the audio tab. And audio, much like the general tab up here, I usually don't have to do anything to the audio. Now, if you're doing a music show or something like that, you might want to experiment with some things. But generally, the audio is fine to leave it like it is. So we'll just leave it like it is and move on to the video. Now, this is where you do need to really kind of make sure that your settings are what you want them to be. Your base canvas resolution, this is your canvas right here where my mouse is. That's, right now I've got mine set to 1920 by 1080, which is full high definition. And that's full, HD. Now, if your webcam won't do that, like my internal webcam and this little webcam I've got here, kind of 1280, 720p, then there's some scaling involved that OBS Studio has to do. But you can see, my base, kind of what it's receiving, it's thinking it is 1920 by 1080, and my output is set here to 1280. So I want to kind of right now, if you keep them the same, if you keep your base canvas and your output resolution the same, then OBS has to work a little bit less. It's a little bit less, hard on the computer. But keep in mind that some streaming services, Facebook and others, may only receive a 720 stream, which with high definition world, 1920 by 1080 is kind of the default high definition resolution. And then 720p, the 1280 by 720 that pick here, is kind of the medium, if you want to think about it that way, the medium high definition. Our Blackmagic devices, some of them, the Blackmagic Web Presenter and other webcams generally are 720p. So, it just, OBS is pretty good at scaling. So again, you'll just have to do some testing for your best results. But generally, I like to leave mine the same and then let the service kind of deal with it. But if you do have a little bit slower computer, you can, of course, kind of come in here and set both of these to 1280 by 720. So the hotkeys, these are some pretty cool little keyboard shortcuts that you can build in there. You can build them up as needed, and when we do the image slideshow, and I'll show you guys that source here in a couple of minutes, kind of talk about that, you can see that you can actually add keyboards to, our keyboard shortcuts to create certain things. I can tell, if I want to have a keyboard shortcut for streaming, I can actually set up, I don't know why I might want to push L, but let's push S. And now when I apply that, if I was to push the S on my keyboard, it would start streaming. So you can kind of set some keyboard shortcuts that allow you to switch between different sources and different image slideshows and different scenes and stuff. And in fact, you can see that these are my scenes over here, and I actually have keyboard shortcuts that I can switch to a different scene if I want to. Audio input and all those sort of fun things. So that's the hotkeys. And then once again, under Advanced, generally you don't really have to worry about setting things up with Advanced under the Advanced tab. Most of this by default will be fine. Whether it's your video, because OBS Studio will actually look at your computer and figure out most of this for you, and so you don't have to worry about that. Don't have to worry about the stream delay unless you just want to. If you're doing some sort of debate and you're worried about something happening, you can do that. You can see to automatically reconnect. So most of this is set to just perfectly fine by default. And of course, don't forget to hit apply as we close out this section about settings. So just to recap real quick, under settings, stream is really important because this is where you put your stream key, which tells OBS where to send the stream to. And you set it again by Facebook or YouTube. And generally you'll have to go and put your, depending on which service, you'll have to get that stream key and send it there. Again, output is where you set kind of if you're having issues with the streaming and it's overloaded your computer, or you want different quality settings, and that's where you set that up. And the other one that you'll kind of need to know is video, where you set your base, resolution. You can see, I follow some guy. There's a lot of YouTube videos. You saw that nice little pop-up right there from a YouTube channel that I follow. So there's a lot of different things that you can see about OBS Studio, but hopefully this overview will work for you in your school because, like I said, OBS is really powerful. It's free, and you can do a lot of really cool stuff with it. In some ways, it's almost its own little video switcher. If you have enough sources, as I'll kind of demonstrate in a minute. So video, again, if you leave, just kind of, depending on your computer power, I like to have my base and output at the same. And then just make sure you hit apply. It'll go away, and then I'll hit OK, and we can move on to setting up a scene. Okay, so here we go with the next section where I want to talk about scenes. How do you control scenes and how do you set up scenes? So I've reset my interface, so just kind of start from scratch with this, and you can see I've got my blank default scene. You see it says you don't have any sources before, so I can right click and do add, or I can do the plus key, which I'll do, so it'll hang up here and you'll see some of the different sources. Audio input capture, that's pretty important. It's important to understand that most of the time OBS Studio treats audio or treats cameras as here's your camera, but then also here's your audio from that camera. It treats it as separate sources. You can't just say here's my camera, like the one I'm talking on to right now, or this webcam, and have it done. You've actually got to tell it that there's audio. So you have to actually set up your audio mixer a little bit differently, which is a little bit of a hassle, as we'll see in a minute. And the audio mixer again is very, very important. So video capture devices that we'll kind of come down to in a minute, these are going to be real important. Those can be web cameras like I've got here, an integrated laptop camera, or a Blackmagic device, kind of got like I got here, which is an external device that takes whatever video source you got and turns it into a webcam. Those are kind of where you're going to spend the majority of your time. So you can see I've got a Blackmagic device here. OBS also lets you choose browsers, so I can actually bring in like Firefox or Microsoft Edge, not so much Chrome. Sometimes it doesn't work too well. Display capture, I can actually recapture my computer window if I've got external monitors hooked up to it or different monitors hooked up. Images and image slideshows, those are pretty cool. You can actually set up a folder with a number of pictures on your hard drive and have those cycle through, or maybe you have like a title slide or something like that. And I'll demonstrate those more in a few minutes as we keep going through this presentation. Media source, if you have a video on your computer that you want to play, you can actually add that as a media source. NDI source, this is the NewTek software that lets you bring in something if you have a video toaster in your school or whatever like that, or a TriCaster, or some other sort of video switcher. You can actually, if you can set it up as an NDI source, then OBS Studio can display it, and it's pretty cool. Text also lets you add in layers of text like phone numbers and titles and stuff separately. as we'll see in a minute. And window capture, if you have just a specific window, like maybe a PDF file or something, you can also capture that. So let me go in and start off with video capture device. And you can see it tells me, do I want to create new or add existing? And it's important to understand that when you create a video capture device, OBS is going to use that same device from scene to scene to scene. If you try to create a new capture device with, like for instance, a little webcam right here, it can confuse OBS Studio. So I'm just going to start off with, and you have to kind of use, that's why you have the use existing or add existing that you'll see in a minute. So I'm just going to go through and reset back up those scenes I had earlier. So tell it OK. And so this is, you can see on here on my window, my UVC camera. And just, generally under the resolution and things like that, you can kind of leave that by default unless you're running into issues. So we're just going to do OK. And you can see right there. Now if you notice, I'm talking, but nothing is happening over here. Even though it's a video capture device, it's not seeing any audio. So I've got to go back into OBS Studio, and we're going to add an audio input capture. And we'll tell it OK. And now I get my device, and so I'm going to make sure I pick the same one. There we are. AC interface. Don't have to worry about the device timestamps. And so now here is my audio from this little web camera. I can add more video devices or more things to this scene. In fact, let me do that real quick just to kind of illustrate a video capture device. I'll do my integrated web camera this time. Wink. And so you can see this one comes up at a smaller resolution than my base one. So because of that, what I have to do, if you see it's got this red box around it, now I just kind of simply drag and drop and it'll fill the screen, and it puts it up on top. I can, using my controls here, I can move it up or down, kind of reorder it like that. I can also, using this little eye control right here, I can change the visibility of it. So you can do some testing and some configuring if you need to set up some stuff in a scene. Maybe set up some pictures or some text or something that you turn on and off. And it's a pretty cool ability to do that. So the top layer is, of course, the one that is visible most of them. Let me click that again. There we go. And one more thing I kind of wanted to mention. If you see right here, in the newest OBS, you have a place that you can actually click on for properties, and it brings up your properties tab. You also have a filters. Filters are pretty cool. Filters let you do things, especially if you have audio. If you have hum in your audio, there are some audio filters that you can see right here, and you click the plus, and it brings up a couple of things. You can see noise gate, noise suppression, which again, if you've got noise in your audio, you can do that. I can also come down here to my effect filters, and you see where it says crop pad or scrolling and aspect ratio. You can actually do some scaling and aspect ratio. You can really do some pretty cool things with OBS Studio. So I'm just going to apply this effect filter, and it gives me the choice to choose the resolution. So let's just this ought to be interesting. Oops! So now I changed it back to square on this one, so it really stretches me out there, but we don't want to do that. And so that filter will be applied to this scene and that image. You can see it's really stretched out right now, so that's kind of odd. Let me close that down so I don't distract myself with that. So that's adding filters. You can kind of play with those a little bit. Generally, you don't really have to do a filter. You can, if you want to do a lower third, you can add some stuff, maybe crop a graphic image down or something like that. So that's a base scene, but let me set up another couple of scenes and kind of show you, how this works. So this scene that you're seeing right here is kind of my web camera scene. So I'm going to just click Add a Scene, and you can see the default name is Scene 2, but we're going to add this one. We're going to call this BMD, like I had earlier for the Blackmagic device. Tell it OK, and you see the screen goes blank because it's a new scene. So I want to go ahead and, now that I've got this BMD scene added right here, I want to go ahead and add a source to it. So I'm going to tell it Video Capture Device. And if I click Add Existing, like I mentioned a minute ago, it lets me reuse a device from a previous one. But it does also bring in the filters. So now I've got this in here, and you can see it's stretched out again, which I don't want. So I can delete that source. I'm going to remove that Video Capture Device. And I'm just going to start over from scratch. And this time I'm going to tell it a new video capture device, and it gives me my choices. And I'm going to choose Blackmagic Design. And you see it brings up my color bars that's coming from my studio system. And I'm going to tell it OK, and we're good to go. But again, I also have to, oops, wrong button. I also have to add an audio input capture, so I'm going to have to create a new one. I'm going to tell it microphone, it just calls it microphone. I'm just looking for the Blackmagic Design. So I do Blackmagic Design, do OK. And eventually if I had some audio playing through that, you would see it. So I can also add another scene. We'll call this one my NDI scene. Tell it OK. So I'm going to click here for plus. And there's my NDI source. And I get to choose here, because it knows it's an NDI source, so it's actually looking for it. Tell it OK. Now this one actually brings in audio with it, but it's one of the few that do. Most of your web cameras don't, but Blackmagic Design is actually letting it bring it in with both, and so you'll see my audio is there. But this is real important when I switch back over to my default scene. If you notice, the audio went away. So I would have to, if I wanted to use that audio, and you can see how the audio mixer switches here, and I'll go again in more detail in just a second with this, but you'll notice that the audio doesn't stay with it. So let me come back in here and let me just add let me add a video file. We'll call this video clip and give it a name. And I'm going to click on the plus key. I'm going to tell it media source. And see, it gives me a choice, you know, like local file, which probably will. I'm going to tell it browse. So we'll just do this one, a nice little PSA that one of my students did. And open. Now it doesn't really preview, but I can tell it to loop if I need to, restart playback when it becomes active, which is probably what I have happen. And tell it OK. Now media sources also bring audio with it, which is kind of nice. And you'll see, you know, it's playing the video. So if I switch back over to my Blackmagic device, audio goes away. And then when I switch back to my video, it starts back over again. So it's real important to understand and keep in mind that scenes are actually collections of sources. So you're switching between collections of sources when you go to a different scene. Hope that will help you keep that, kind of keep that separate in your mind as we move on talking about the audio mixer and a couple of the other kind of cool controls. But scenes are really where you do the majority of your actual in-stream switching and work when you're using OBS Studio. Okay, so in this section I want to talk some about the audio mixer, because the audio mixer is a very important and potentially confusing and pitfall-y kind of area of OBS Studio. So one thing I want to kind of mention, let me go back up here to my default scene. You can see the audio levels that I've got going. It's real important to kind of keep an eye on this, because when you're streaming you want to make sure that your audio levels are up near the red. You know, I'm talking on this integrated webcam right here and it's picking it up okay. But one thing you don't want to have happen is you don't want to have your audio levels, as you'll see as I adjust the level on my NDI clip. See how it's red right there? Red will clip and distort and sound bad. So you can actually, for each source, adjust the audio level down until it's something much more agreeable. So now I've got my NDI audio level adjusted down. Let me go back up here to my scene. If you notice though, when I switch scenes, the audio for the NDI source disappeared. And this is one of the slightly confusing things about OBS Studio, is that unless you duplicate mics or add them, audio sources, they don't follow. In fact, you can see that from scene to scene, you know, OBS Studio is looking for those collections of sources. And so from my default scene to my Blackmagic scene, I don't have the webcam. And so you have to add those in. And when you add them in, then you will have your audio kind of following from scene to scene. So that's something that's real important to do and to understand, is to make sure that you have to duplicate an audio source in a scene. So for, let's say that, you know, as I'm talking right now, you can see I've got my laptop mic that I've renamed. And by the way, it's a really cool thing that you can do. is if I right click on a source, I can rename it. And if you get a lot of sources, you probably want to do this. So I'm just going to rename this one USB cam. And this one will be, I'm going to rename this. You have to use separate names. USB cam mic. So now if I come into my BMD scene and click on it, now you see I don't have my laptop camera's web microphone, so I'm going to click plus. I'm going to tell it audio input capture, and this time I want to add existing. So I'm going to tell it laptop mic. So now when I click OK, it's there, and so now every time I switch between BMD and scene, my default one, my microphone is there. And that's real important for audio continuity, because otherwise your microphone will disappear and you won't hear it on the stream. So just kind of have to keep an eye and make sure that your microphones, wherever they are, that you have those audio sources on there. So I'm going to add my microphone to this scene as well, add existing, laptop mic, okay. So now I've got that on here, and so every scene that I go back and forth to in this audio mixer will do that. And so again, like I said, you can reuse microphones from scene to scene, and you will have to do that just to make sure that you have the same audio. Now there are a couple of other cool things that you can do in this. In fact, if you see on my screen right here, the I also mutes a button, mutes an input, just like it does for video. So if you need to, if you've got some music and you need to mute it, or a speaker, and you need to mute them, then you can mute that right there. That's the mute button. This also mutes the person right here, the speaker icon. You can also mute it from here. It's kind of, whichever one you're most comfortable using, but if you need to, turn something off from scene to scene, you can do that. Now, one real kind of cool trick, property that I want to show you guys, if you right-click on the sprocket right here, we can also do it over here, but if you right-click on the sprocket, you'll see a couple of options. I've kind of basically talked about filters. Filters are where you can do stuff like if you have noise or whatever, then you can go in and clean that up. But under advanced audio properties, this is kind of important if you want to hear what you're putting out. So I'm going to click advanced audio properties, and if you notice right here, it brings up in that scene all the sources that I've got. It shows you the volume, which again, don't have to worry about that. So if you're bringing in, like a studio camera or something like that, that has one channel of audio, you want to click and tell it that it's mono. Kind of a handy little tip that I've learned from, using OBS over the while. Mono is kind of handy. And right here where it says monitor off, by default, OBS Studio, if you have some headphones plugged up, you won't be able to hear what OBS is processing and passing through for a mix. So you need to come in and tell it monitor and output. This will actually send that to the speakers. So monitor and output, which again, I don't want to do that too loud right now because it'll cause feedback, but monitor and output is very important because you want to be able to hear that the audio that you're sending, for example, in the NDI channel right here, isn't too loud and distorted, okay, or too quiet. So remember, for each one of these, right click. It's a good idea to do this because again, by default, OBS doesn't set it up this way. You want to do monitor and output. Oop, there we go. Now you can hear that sound. So we will turn this back down a little bit. So monitor and output is very, very important. So that's kind of, the basics of this. The biggest thing for the audio mixer, as I said again, is make sure that from scene to scene, you have, for instance, the laptop mic, if that's going to be your main microphone, you have that from scene to scene to scene. A little bit of a hassle to remember, but once you kind of get in that habit of looking for it, especially when you're streaming, not that this has ever happened to me, but if you're streaming along and you switch a scene to go to a different camera or something and all of a sudden your audio drops out, I forgot to add the microphone. So again, these little things you learn over time. So we're going to go next to the Controls tab and then also talk some more about some advanced stuff in the Studios tab. Okay, so in this section, I want to go in a little more detail about the Controls tab right here. I've kind of briefly touched on the Start Recording and the Start Streaming, but you also now with OBS Studio get a virtual camera. And a virtual camera can be used to send the output of OBS Studio into something like Zoom or some other application like Skype video conferencing or something like that. Really powerful if you want to add titles and stuff to your camera. Really, really cool. Studio mode, I'm going to spend kind of another section. The next section will be talking specifically about studio mode and some cool things you can do with that to make it a little more like a video switcher. And of course, I've already talked about scenes, or settings rather, and we're not going to do exit right now because exits. So let me just click on Start Streaming. And you'll see, I've got my stream key set up to going out to YouTube. It's telling me that I'm using, again, down here in the stats section, 30 frames per second. It's green. Everything is good. If you have network problems or other stuff, it'll go yellow or red. And of course, it tells you that you're live and your percentage of dropped frames. So I also want to start recording. You can see it gives you this here. So now I'm streaming and recording. And generally, you want to kind of keep that going unless you have problems and you have to start and stop again. But generally, as long as your network is fine, you should have no issues with that. But I did want to show you one cool, very helpful window up here. So if you click up here on View, there's a little line that says Stats. Stats is really important if you're having problems, or if you're just kind of getting into that statistics kind of thing. But if you're having problems with your stream or your recording or something like this, the stats window gives you a lot more detail than your bottom stats frame does. You can see that with the stats window, it tells me how much available space I've got, how much memory I'm using, which is not a lot. Generally, if OBS is having issues on your computer, you will see frames missed or skipped frames. And as you can see right now, rendering lag, I've missed 18 frames, skipped frames, 8 frames due to encoding lag. Average time to render frame, and again I've got this kind of high settings. It tells me live and recording, total data output, and the bit rate. So if I jump this up, then depending on my computer speed, I might have more missed frames or skipped frames. But generally, if it's not red like this, and if it's if OBS thinks it's fine, it's not going to be yellow or red or anything like that. In fact, you can see I've only missed 8 frames out of 3,500, which is really not a lot. And I've only missed 18 out of 78,000. So again, I'm basically having a really nice, good stream right now. So stats are real important if you're having problems. It kind of helps you figure out, okay, so if I need to lower my data rate, I need to lower, change some encoding settings, what do I play with in my settings, kind of experiment with, kind of balance between, the constant bit rate, maybe the, recording size, recording quality, to get all of this back depending on the computer you're using. And again, if you have a decent computer, like I even use a, not to shamelessly plug, the Acer Nitro, kind of a lower end gaming laptop, and it works great. So this is, this is not a gaming laptop, this is my workstation laptop. But even this computer behind me, it's, it would have no problem with most of what we're doing. So OBS, again, has gotten pretty powerful. So what I want to do now is I want to move on into talking, in this next section, I want to talk about the studio mode, which gives you a little more power. Okay, so in this section, I want to talk about studio mode. Studio mode lets you take your OBS interface and experience kind of to the next level. And you see when I clicked on it, it brings up 2 windows. The program window right here shows you what's going out to your source. So I'm going to go ahead and click, we'll just do start streaming, again, kind of a private unlisted stream. So, and we will click on the BMD, but when I click on my preview, preview shows me the next scene up, okay? And I can click on whichever one of these I want. So for instance, I want to come over here to my color bars, and now I click, when I want to transition to it, I can either cut or fade, so I'm just going to click cut. And you see, now I've switched. Now, because in my previous section, I had set up the different microphones for this, my laptop mic goes from scene to scene to scene. So studio mode is really about, the video that you'll see. I can click transition and it goes back to the other one. I can click fade and I can click cut, and it kind of flip-flops back and forth between whatever I've got. So I'm going to tell it transition again to go over to here. And now you see it brings up that NDI source, and you can probably hear a little bit of that audio. If I do the video clip, it doesn't have it set, but when I click cut, it brings it up and it starts playing it. So studio mode is really powerful because it lets you make sure that, you know, your camera, for instance, is ready to go. You know, that your sources, that, you know, your camera's framed up, or maybe, you know, your video clip or whatever in NDI is where you want it to have, or whatever you're doing. And so you can actually kind of preview it, because that's again what it says right there, preview. So the preview is really, really powerful because it lets you, again, kind of make sure that your sources are ready to go before that, and the scene is ready to go. And you'll see how when I click on the scene, it brings up whatever audio sources I've got, so I can tell that those scenes, the audio for those scenes is also ready to go. And so now when I click cut, it moves over to that scene. And the same thing back over here for NDI. You know, I can fade into it and it's there. So studio mode is really, really powerful. And that's kind of, again, the basics of studio mode, where, you know, I've started using studio mode pretty much exclusively because it just gives me much more control and much more confidence, you know, that whatever webcam I'm doing is ready to go. And you can see, in fact, when I switched on in my preview, the preview that I set up from this scene didn't immediately change over until I hit cut for that. So I can, again, kind of mute that camera and cut back. So the studio mode gives me that confidence that what I want to show next as a scene is ready to go. It's a kind of a good thing in case you forget something. You know, make sure you got your microphone set and all that kind of good stuff. So studio mode, again, kind of really recommend it. Just, you know, it really, again, gives you that confidence that your next scene is ready to go, depending on what you're going to do. Okay, so in this section, I want to go over a couple of important things to know about OBS Studio, some really kind of helpful tips and stuff like that. So the first time you start it up, under Tools, you'll see the Auto Configuration Wizard. And also, if you're not streaming or not recording, you can also open up the Auto Configuration Wizard. And what this does is, you can see it brings up and says optimized for streaming, recording is secondary. You know, it gives you those options. And auto configuration is pretty accurate. So I generally recommend running that the first time and letting OBS see what kind of system you've got. But I'm already done that, so I'm not going to do it right now. You can also, with your scenes, you can duplicate them. And I've kind of touched on this before, but what I want to do is I want to right click on this. I want to duplicate. It gives you a lot of options for it. You know, copy filters, things like that, rename, remove. You always have to have at least one scene, by the way. So we're just going to do this, and you see it brings up the default name, Blackmagic Device 2. If I want to give it a different name because I want to do something different with it, tell it no audio, just to play around with it. So Blackmagic Device. And you can also use the little up and down arrows to move it up or down. Now this doesn't really, with the scenes, doesn't really kind of mean much other than, you know, kind of where it appears in the order. Let me go back to studio mode. But in the, you know, in the BMD no audio scene, I can remove my laptop mic if I want to. And now in the no audio scene, I can tell it cut. You can see my microphone went away, but everything else kind of stays the same. So you can duplicate scenes, you can rename them. Same thing with sources I've kind of mentioned before. You can rename sources by right-clicking on it. And you can duplicate them from scene to scene using and add existing. And that is really, really powerful, really labor-saving device for that. Because if you're not careful, you will do what I've done and end up with, as it opens up, I'll give it a second. You can experiment and you can have bazillion scenes. So these are some stuff over the course of the 5 or 6 months that I've done, where I've got, you can see some test scenes, bringing in Skype, music lyrics, cropping things, NDI laptop, so you can have all sorts of scenes. We're going to go back over here to our ALCTE virtual presentation collection of scenes. You can export them, you know, if you have different computers, so you can set it up once, export the scenes to your computer hard drive, open them up in another one, import them. So again, very, very powerful. Profiles you can set up, you know, for different users to give them access to those scenes. And again, it's just very powerful because if you notice, OBS by default doesn't really give you a save when I open this up. So you don't really save it. What you're actually doing in OBS Studio is you are setting up profiles and scene collections. So scene collections, so you got to think about it in an OBS world, which is more scene collections, collections of sources. So, and again, let me give you a little more information in detail about the sources. So let's say we've got down here on this one, well, we'll duplicate this scene again. And we'll call this one image. So I've got this here, I've got my, let me go ahead and cut to it. So I still got my mic, and now to this image scene, I'm going to kind of mute that picture right there. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to tell it, and again, you have so many different options that you can do. Let me go ahead and do image. Create new. Now, once you add an image into the OBS kind of world, into the program, it's going to be there. So I'm just going to tell it OK. And I'm going to browse. And I'm just going to click this random picture from where we're getting some lightboard training and learning all about DMX lightboards, which, highly recommend learning about OBS Studio. DMX, wow. That's a whole nother. So it brings in this picture. And when I click OK, you see it brings it in at full size. So one thing you'll have to do sometimes is you may need to come in here and resize a picture. You can see I can kind of squeeze it down and move it around. And by the way, you can do this, you can actually get your pictures down any size you need in there. I generally like to do this with there. So I can actually do kind of a picture-in-picture thing. So if you notice now that I've got this kind of scaled down and clicked on, it's upside down. So I would right-click on it, and you can see that it gives me the ability to transform it, and so I might want to flip it. I guess I should actually flip horizontal, shouldn't I? Let's do transform. There we go. Now it's where it needs to be. And when I cut, it applies that transformation. So images, you can actually add image sources, you can have slideshows and set up hotkeys to go through each of them. Okay, so now that we've got our image displayed, let's say we wanted to capture a browser. OBS Studio works pretty well with most things except for Chrome. So let's try actually see what it looks like when we actually do a browser capture. So keep in mind that when you do a browser capture, this is the actual OBS browser. And you can see it starts out 800 by 600. So I'm just going to tell it OK, and that's kind of the default. So I'm going to pull this over here and do cut. Now, if I wanted to actually go to a different web page, I would tell it Properties. I could probably do this first. And I'm just going to type in our Montevallo homepage and tell it OK. And there it is. And it updated and refreshed. Now, again, like every other source in OBS Studio, I can rescale it if I need to. I can refresh it just like any other browser. So, it lets you do pretty well all those different sources. And I would really recommend kind of playing with the different sources to build a show that you want. OBS Studio will really let you do a lot of really cool things with that, to record, to capture, to stream out. You can even add text. So let's come in here and add text. And it brings up, and I'm just going to type, let's see, virtual conference. I cannot with my hanging. Gives you the ability, of course, to select font just like other programs, the size. So we'll do OK. Now I can scale that and kind of move it around wherever I need, kind of build that scene up. So again, remember, this is a scene that I'm building up that's not showing up yet. And so it won't happen until I click that. And just a quick thing about the ordering. So let's say that I pulled this down on top and I want my text to be down behind my browser. Kind of a fun little thing to do. Now if I click cut, it does that. So that's a little bit about layering and all that, because again, in the sources are actually layers, and the one that's on top will be the one that shows up most of the time. So you can have multiple texts. I can come in here and I can duplicate and edit, do all sorts of really cool stuff with my sources. And this is really, real important to remember that these sources are grouped by scenes. So once you kind of get that workflow in mind, you know, it should help you out with that. Now another kind of cool thing to end on, you know, I've kind of gone through all this stuff about OBS Studio, and you're probably thinking, wow, you know, that looks, you know, pretty straightforward and stuff. If your computer will handle it, you can actually do some cool stuff with it. Down here under View, this multi-scene window thing, where it brings up almost like a little touchscreen switcher. I can actually see, whoops, little previews until I click this with my mouse, of the scenes that I'm talking about. And you can see my preview and my program. So let me drag this down here a little bit. So there's my bar, so I can click cut, and it pops it up over there. Now this actually works better if you've got a dual monitor setup than my single monitor that I've got, although I can come up here and do full screen with this, you know, it's an I can take. But generally would not really recommend, you know, I would use the multi-view if you've got a second monitor or aren't running OBS Studio in full screen mode, like I'm doing right now. Generally, studio mode, to me, is one of the safer ways to do it, because I can kind of, with a big screen, I can kind of preview everything that I'm going to do. So that's really, you know, an overview of OBS Studio. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. If you have questions, again, my email address is right here, cofieldj@montevallo.edu, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have about this. So thanks for tuning in, and please again, let me know what you think and if you have questions.